The old mountain pass, they called it Serpent Spine, was a ribbon of asphalt unspooling through the inky blackness. For Elias, the night bus route was as familiar as the lines on his own weathered hands. Years he'd steered these winding curves, ferrying souls between the sprawling city and the misty highlands. And with the miles came the whispers, the hushed tales passed between drivers at roadside stops, stories of shadows that danced in the periphery of headlights, of mournful sighs carried on the wind. Elias, a man of logic and routine, had always dismissed them as folklore, the product of tired minds and lonely stretches of road. But tonight felt different. A thick, cloying fog had descended, swallowing the world beyond the reach of his high beams. The air hung heavy, still, amplifying the rhythmic hum of the engine and the soft murmur of his few passengers, most already lost in slumber. Yet, a prickling unease crawled up Elias's spine, an instinct that whispered of something amiss. The silence of the mountain felt less like peace and more like a held breath, the kind that precedes a sudden, sharp cry. The wind, usually a boisterous companion on these night journeys, was eerily absent, leaving a vacuum that seemed to press in on the small haven of the bus. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his gaze fixed on the narrow strip of illuminated road ahead, a sense of anticipation, dark and undefined, settling in the pit of his stomach. He couldn't shake the feeling that tonight, Serpent Spine held a secret it was waiting to reveal. And as the bus rounded a particularly sharp bend, the headlights cut through the swirling mist to reveal a sight that would forever be etched into Elias's memory, a figure standing motionless by the roadside, shrouded in shadow, and carrying something long and dark upon its shoulders. And as the bus rounded a particularly sharp bend, the headlights cut through the swirling mist to reveal a sight that would forever be etched into Elias's memory, a figure standing motionless by the roadside, shrouded in shadow, and carrying something long and dark upon its shoulders. The rain, which had been a mere drizzle, intensified, each drop a cold finger tracing patterns on the windshield. It was at the infamous Curve 7, a bend whispered to be haunted by more than just treacherous geography, that Elias saw it clearly. A man, or what appeared to be a man, was crossing the road, his form distorted by the fog and the flickering beams of the headlights. But it wasn't his shape that sent a jolt of pure terror through Elias, it was what he carried. A dark, wooden coffin, seemingly heavy, rested on his narrow shoulders. The figure moved with an unnatural speed, a swift, gliding motion that defied the slick surface of the asphalt. His feet, if they even touched the ground, were invisible in the swirling mist. An icy dread gripped Elias as the figure's face turned towards the bus. Even through the rain-streaked windshield and the distorting fog, the eyes were unmistakable, cold, empty sockets that seemed to pierce through the vehicle, locking onto Elias with a chilling intensity. It was an encounter that defied logic, a nightmare made real on the lonely stretch of Serpent Spine. Elias's foot slammed on the brake pedal. The bus shuddered violently, tires screeching in protest against the sudden deceleration. A cacophony of gasps and screams erupted from the passengers, their peaceful slumber shattered by the abrupt stop and the palpable fear that had suddenly filled the vehicle. "What in God's name?" someone cried out from the back. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden silence that followed the screams. He stared, transfixed, at the spot where the figure had been, but it had vanished, swallowed by the relentless fog as if it had never been. Then, a strange sensation filled the bus, a heavy, cloying aroma that made the passengers cough and shift uncomfortably. It was the unmistakable scent of damp wood, pungent and earthy, mingled with the faint, sweet undertones of burning incense, a combination that sent shivers down Elias's spine. He tried to rationalize it, perhaps a nearby lumber truck, a roadside shrine he hadn't noticed in the fog. But the intensity of the smell, confined within the sealed space of the bus, felt unnatural, otherworldly. Panic began to claw at Elias. He fumbled with the ignition, his hands slick with sweat, but the engine remained stubbornly silent, refusing to turn over. The bus was dead, stranded on the most haunted curve of the Serpent Spine, enveloped by a suffocating fog and the unsettling aroma of death. Just as a wave of despair washed over Elias, a blood-curdling scream pierced the tense silence. It came from a young woman sitting near the rear window, her face pale and contorted with terror. "Uncle! Look! There's someone else!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger towards the back of the bus. Elias's eyes darted to the rearview mirror. In the dim glow of the interior lights, he saw a figure sitting silently in the last row. It was a person cloaked in white, their head bowed, two arms cradling something long and slender wrapped in a vibrant red cloth. A wave of confusion washed over Elias, quickly followed by a fresh surge of dread. He distinctly remembered counting 10 passengers when they left the city. Now there were 11. "Hey!" Elias called out, his voice trembling slightly. "Let me see what you've got there." The figure remained motionless, its head still bowed, offering no response. A cold knot of fear tightened in Elias's stomach. He had to know. He had to see who this silent passenger was. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled courage, Elias unbuckled his seatbelt, his legs feeling like lead as he moved towards the aisle. The air in the back of the bus felt colder, heavier, the scent of damp wood and incense even stronger. Each step felt like a descent into a deeper level of unease. He reached the last row, his hand hovering over the back of the empty seat next to the silent figure. Empty. But he had seen. He blinked, his eyes straining in the dim light. The seat was indeed empty. Yet, on the floor where the figure had been sitting, there were damp footprints and a long, muddy trail leading towards the back door. A collective gasp filled the bus. Whatever Elias and the screaming girl had seen, it was no longer there. But the lingering chill in the air and the oppressive scent were undeniable proof that something profoundly unsettling had just occurred on the haunted Curve 7. And as the silence stretched, punctuated only by the frantic breathing of the terrified passengers, the headlights flickered violently and then plunged the entire bus into absolute darkness. The wind, which had been absent, suddenly returned with a vengeance, howling through the cracks in the windows like a chorus of tormented souls. Then, a series of soft, deliberate knocks echoed from the rear of the bus. Knock, knock, knock. The sound seemed to come from the very fabric of the vehicle, sending a fresh wave of terror through the stranded occupants. Elias, a man who had faced countless challenges on the road, felt a primal fear grip his heart, a fear that whispered of forces beyond his comprehension. What unholy encounter had they stumbled upon on this desolate stretch of Serpent Spine? And what did this silent knocking signify? The answers, he knew with a chilling certainty, were not going to be comforting. The soft, deliberate knocks echoed from the rear of the bus. Knock, knock, knock. The sound, though gentle, resonated with an unsettling persistence in the sudden, oppressive silence. Elias's mind reeled, trying to make sense of the vanishing figure, the strange aroma, the impossible 11th passenger, and now this tapping from the darkness. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, his gaze fixed on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those empty eye sockets staring back at him. But there was only the reflection of the terrified faces of his passengers, illuminated by the faint glow of their phone screens. What unearthly encounter had befallen them on this lonely stretch of the Serpent Spine? And what did these spectral knocks portend? Sleep offered no escape that night. Instead, it plunged Elias into a realm more vivid and disturbing than the reality he had just experienced. He found himself standing once more on the rain-slicked asphalt of Curve 7, the fog a thick, suffocating blanket. But the figure that emerged from the mist this time was different. The terrifying aura of the spectral coffin bearer had dissipated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of sorrow and despair. The shadowy form resolved itself into a man, gaunt and weary, his clothes tattered and stained, his face etched with the harsh realities of sun and wind. The dark wooden coffin still rested on his shoulders, but now it seemed less like a burden of horror and more like a tangible weight of grief. Tears streamed down the man's weathered cheeks, his eyes, no longer empty sockets, but pools of profound sadness, fixed on Elias with a desperate plea. His voice, when it finally came, was a low, heart-wrenching moan that seemed to carry the weight of untold suffering. "Driver, please, just a short way, to my mother." The words hung heavy in the misty air, each syllable laced with an unbearable longing. As Elias listened, the tragic tale of the man, who introduced himself as Kai, unfolded in his mind like a vivid, sorrowful film. Kai had been a poor laborer, toiling tirelessly to care for his ailing mother. When she finally succumbed to her illness, he was left with nothing to arrange a proper burial. Driven by filial piety and a desperate desire to honor his mother's memory, he had borrowed money and traveled to a distant town to purchase a simple wooden coffin. But on his arduous journey back, carrying this final offering, tragedy had struck at the very curve where Elias had encountered his spectral form. An accident, a moment of inattention, and his life, along with his precious cargo, had been lost to the unforgiving ravine. Now, his spirit was trapped, tethered to the last act of love he could not complete, his soul burdened by the anguish of leaving his mother without a proper farewell. The raw emotion in Kai's voice, the palpable sense of his regret and his desperate yearning, resonated deep within Elias. The terrifying ghost of the mountain pass was gone, replaced by the heartbreaking image of a son's unfulfilled devotion. A profound sense of empathy washed over Elias, the initial fear giving way to a deep well of compassion for this lost and grieving soul. He understood now, the ghostly appearances, the strange smells, the silent passenger, they were all manifestations of Kai's desperate plea, his yearning to be reunited with his mother, to finally lay her to rest. The dream ended with Kai's tearful gaze fixed on Elias, a silent question hanging in the misty air. Could Elias, a living man, help him complete his final, sorrowful journey? The weight of that unspoken request settled heavily on Elias's heart as he finally stirred from his restless sleep, the echoes of Kai's plea still ringing in his ears. The cold reality of the bus, still stranded on the desolate Curve 7, was no longer the primary source of his unease. It was the memory of Kai's anguished face, the weight of his unfinished task, that now filled Elias with a profound sense of responsibility. He knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that he could not simply drive away and leave Kai's spirit trapped on that lonely mountain pass. He had to do something. He had to help this grieving son find his way home. But how? How could a mortal man intervene in the affairs of a restless spirit? The answer remained elusive, shrouded in the same mysterious fog that clung to the serpent's spine. Yet, a flicker of determination ignited within Elias. He would find a way, even if it meant venturing into the darkest corners of the mountain's secrets. The mournful plea in his dream had planted a seed of purpose, and Elias knew that his journey that night was far from over. The ghostly encounter had transformed into a mission, a solemn obligation to a nameless soul yearning for peace. What steps could he possibly take to fulfill such an extraordinary request? The answer, he suspected, lay hidden somewhere in the whispered legends and the forgotten tragedies of the serpent's spine. The weight of that unspoken request settled heavily on Elias's heart as he finally stirred from his restless sleep, the echoes of Kai's plea still ringing in his ears. The cold reality of the bus, still stranded on the desolate Curve 7, was no longer the primary source of his unease. It was the memory of Kai's anguished face, the weight of his unfinished task, that now filled Elias with a profound sense of responsibility. He knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that he could not simply drive away and leave Kai's spirit trapped on that lonely mountain pass. He had to do something. He had to help this grieving son find his way home. And so, as the first rays of dawn painted the misty peaks with a pale, ethereal light, Elias made a decision. He would seek the truth behind the dream, he would try to understand the tragedy that had befallen Kai, and if at all possible, he would help him find peace. He knew it was an unconventional path, one that strayed far from his usual routine of navigating the treacherous curves of the serpent's spine. But the sorrow in Kai's spectral eyes had touched something deep within him, a sense of shared humanity that transcended the boundaries of life and death. Leaving the bewildered passengers on the still disabled bus, Elias began his search. He walked down the winding road, the damp air clinging to him like a shroud, the silence broken only by the distant calls of unseen birds. He approached a small cluster of weathered houses nestled by the roadside, their corrugated iron roofs glinting dully in the morning light. These were the homes of the people who lived in the shadow of the serpent's spine, their lives intertwined with the mountain's secrets and its whispered tales. Elias, a familiar face on the night route, cautiously approached the first house. An elderly woman with kind eyes and a face lined by years of hardship answered his hesitant knock. He recounted his strange encounter, the ghostly figure, the plea in his dream, the overwhelming sense of sorrow. To his surprise, the woman listened intently, her expression shifting from curiosity to a knowing sadness. She had heard stories, she said, of strange occurrences on Curve 7, of a young man who had met a tragic end while trying to bring his mother's coffin home. Encouraged by her understanding, Elias continued his inquiries, moving from one humble dwelling to another. He spoke to farmers tending their small plots of land, to laborers returning from their early morning work, sharing his unbelievable tale. And as he spoke, a picture began to emerge, pieced together from fragments of local lore and shared memories. They spoke of a young man named Kai, hardworking and devoted to his ailing mother. They recounted his desperate journey to obtain a coffin, his tragic accident on the notorious bend, and the subsequent disappearance of his body. Their voices were filled with a quiet sorrow, a shared sense of loss for a life cut short. Among those who listened to Elias was an old man named Tu Koi, his hands gnarled from years of toil, his eyes holding a deep wisdom. He nodded slowly as Elias finished his story. The boy, Kai, his mother lies buried in the small cemetery near Tan Lock Hamlet, he said, his voice raspy. He never made it back to give her a proper farewell. Beside him stood Bei Lam, a younger man with a strong build and a compassionate gaze, and a wiry youth named Hui Ro, his face earnest and eager to help. They were poor, their lives a constant struggle against the harsh realities of the mountain, but their hearts were generous. Touched by Kai's plight and Elias's genuine concern, they offered their assistance without hesitation. "We know the curve," Bei Lam said, his voice firm. "We will go with you. We will look for him." And so, with the help of these kind strangers, Elias found himself back at the infamous Curve 7. The morning mist still clung to the trees, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Armed with makeshift tools, a broken shovel handle, a rusty hook, they began their search. The terrain was treacherous, the slope leading down from the curve steep and unforgiving. They carefully navigated the undergrowth, their eyes scanning the muddy ground for any sign of Kai's ill-fated journey. The silence of the forest was broken only by their labored breathing and the rustling of leaves underfoot. As they delved deeper into the dense foliage, an unsettling feeling crept over them. The air grew colder, a damp chill that seemed to penetrate their very bones. A lone owl hooted from the depths of the woods, its mournful cry echoing through the stillness, sending a shiver down their spines. The search was arduous, the crude tools offering little purchase against the unforgiving earth. Yet, driven by a shared sense of purpose and a growing determination to bring peace to Kai's restless spirit, they pressed on, their search a testament to the enduring power of human compassion in the face of tragedy and the unknown. The forest held its secrets close, but the quiet resolve of these searchers suggested that they were prepared to unearth them, one painstaking step at a time. What hidden truths lay buried beneath the damp earth and the shadows of Curve 7? And would their efforts finally bring solace to the lost soul of Kai? The answer remained shrouded in the misty silence of the mountain, but their journey of kindness had begun. The search, fueled by a shared sense of compassion, continued under the watchful gaze of the ancient trees. The air remained heavy, each breath a damp reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded on this lonely stretch of the Deotam. Hours crawled by, marked only by the rhythmic thud of their crude tools against the stubborn earth and the occasional, unsettling cry of a forest creature hidden in the dense balm toy. Then, just as a collective weariness began to settle upon them, Hui Ro's voice, usually so light, cracked with a sudden tremor. "Uncle Knock. Uncle Bei Lam, look here." He knelt beside a patch of particularly damp earth, his fingers gently brushing away the clinging mud. Beneath the surface, a dark, indistinct shape began to emerge. Elias and Bei Lam rushed to his side, their hearts pounding with a mixture of trepidation and a desperate hope. As they carefully cleared away the remaining soil, the object revealed itself to be an old, battered helmet, its once vibrant color faded to a muddy brown, the inner padding rotted and crumbling. A heavy silence descended upon the small group. The helmet, though inanimate, spoke volumes of a life violently interrupted. It was a tangible piece of Kai's last journey, a silent testament to the fatal accident on Curve 7. A wave of sorrow washed over Elias, the image of Kai's tear-streaked face in his dream flashing through his mind. Beside the helmet, half buried in the clinging earth, lay something else. Small, fragile fragments of bone, yellowed and brittle with age, were slowly being unearthed. The realization struck them with a chilling certainty: these were the remains of Kai. A collective gasp escaped their lips, a raw expression of grief and pity for the young man whose life had been so cruelly extinguished. The air seemed to grow even colder, the silence more profound, as they knelt around the site, each lost in their own thoughts of the tragedy. Uncle Tu Koi, his weathered face etched with sadness, reached out a trembling hand and gently touched one of the bone fragments. "Poor boy," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "So young." Bei Lam, his strong features softened by sorrow, quietly echoed the sentiment. He just wanted to take his mother home. The weight of Kai's unfulfilled wish hung heavy in the air, a palpable sense of injustice and loss. As they continued their careful excavation, they unearthed another piece of the puzzle. A large, waterlogged log, its wood softened by decay, was found nestled amongst the roots of a gnarled tree. Clinging to its surface, remnants of a faded red cloth, torn and stained with mud, were still visible. It was the coffin Kai had carried in his dream, the simple vessel of his filial devotion. Seeing it in its ruined state, a poignant symbol of his shattered journey, brought a fresh wave of sadness. The rain, which had held off for a while, began to fall again, a light drizzle that seemed like the tears of the heavens, mingling with the mud and the sorrow that permeated the small clearing. With gentle hands and heavy hearts, they gathered the remains of Kai, wrapping them carefully in the torn sacks they had brought. The crude tools were forgotten, replaced by a reverence born of profound respect for the deceased. That afternoon, they made the slow, solemn journey to Tan Loc Hamlet. The rain continued its soft descent, as if the mountain itself was weeping for the lost son. They arrived at the small cemetery near Kai's mother's grave, the dilapidated roofs of the hamlet a stark backdrop to their somber procession. Neighbors, alerted to their discovery, gathered in quiet sympathy. A simple burial was arranged, a testament to the poverty that had marked Kai's life, but filled with a genuine outpouring of human kindness. The small wooden coffin, purchased with borrowed money and never used, was placed beside his mother's final resting place. With bowed heads and tear-filled eyes, they laid Kai's remains to rest. The silence that followed was different from the silence of the mountain pass. It was a peaceful silence, a sense of closure. As the last handful of earth was smoothed over the newly made mound, a feeling of tranquility seemed to settle over the small cemetery. The Lin Han Vat Vong had finally found its way home. The rain softened to a mere whisper, and a faint ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a gentle light upon the two adjacent graves. It was as if the mountain itself acknowledged the peace that had been restored. Elias stood there for a long moment, the weight on his heart finally lifting. He had embarked on a journey driven by a ghostly encounter, but it had led him to a profound understanding of human suffering and the enduring power of compassion. The Dao Tam no longer felt quite so menacing, the darkness less oppressive. In helping Kai find his final resting place, Elias had found a measure of peace himself. But he knew that the memory of the young man and his tragic journey would forever be etched in his mind, a poignant reminder of the Long Ta Chua Doi Thuong that had brought them together on that rain-soaked mountain. What unforeseen consequences might arise from this act of compassion? And how would this extraordinary experience shape Elias's future journeys through the shadowed curves of the serpent's spine? The tranquility that had settled over Tan Loc Hamlet after Kai's burial was a fragile peace, a momentary respite in the relentless rhythm of life and death on the treacherous Dao Tam. Months passed, marked by the changing seasons and the enduring presence of the serpent's spine, its winding curves a constant reminder of the fragility of existence. For Elias, the memory of Kai lingered, a silent passenger on his nightly journeys. He would often glance at Curve 7, the spot where the young man's spectral figure had first appeared, a shiver tracing its way down his spine despite himself. He would murmur a silent prayer for Kai's eternal rest, a small gesture of remembrance for the soul he had helped to find peace. Then came a night steeped in the raw fury of nature. The wind howled like a tormented beast, lashing rain against the bus with relentless force. The road, slick and treacherous, became a ribbon of black ice under Elias's tires. The bong toy seemed to press in from all sides, the tin Michigan of the mountain amplified by the storm's violent symphony. A palpable sense of unease settled over the passengers, their hushed whispers punctuated by the rhythmic screech of the windshield wipers. Elias, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel, felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, a disquieting familiarity with the supernatural events of the past months. As the bus lumbered through the inky blackness, a sudden, blinding flash of lightning illuminated the treacherous curve 7. In that fleeting moment, Elias saw it, a truck, its headlights askew, careening wildly down the slope, completely out of control. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. The screech of tires on wet asphalt, the panicked gasps of the passengers, the sickening lurch of the bus as Elias instinctively swerved to avoid a head-on collision, it all unfolded with agonizing slowness. The bus skidded violently, its tires losing traction on the rain-soaked road. Elias fought desperately with the steering wheel, his muscles straining, his mind racing, but the momentum was too great. With a sickening crunch of metal against rock, the bus careened off the road and slammed into the unforgiving cliff. The impact threw Elias forward against his seatbelt, a searing pain shooting through his chest. The lights went out, plunging the interior into absolute darkness, broken only by the faint, terrified whimpers of the injured passengers. Disoriented and in shock, Elias struggled to regain his senses. The smell of gasoline filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. Groaning, he tried to move, a sharp pain lancing through his leg. He was trapped, pinned behind the mangled steering wheel. Panic began to set in, the cold grip of fear tightening around his heart. Was this how it would end, here on the same cursed curve that had claimed Kai's life? Then, through the haze of pain and fear, a vision began to form. In the oppressive darkness, a soft, ethereal glow emanated from the front of the bus. And within that glow, a figure began to coalesce. It was Kai. But the sorrow that had haunted his spectral eyes before was gone. His face was serene, his lips curved into a gentle, benevolent smile. He stood there, bathed in the soft light, his gaze fixed on Elias, a silent reassurance in the chaos. A profound sense of peace washed over Elias, a feeling of being protected, of being watched over by a familiar presence. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a comforting sensation that defied the cold reality of his predicament. The image of Kai remained for only a fleeting moment, a silent guardian against the encroaching darkness. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it faded away, leaving Elias once again in the cold, hard reality of the wrecked bus. Yet, the feeling of peace lingered, a strange sense of calm amidst the screams and moans of the injured. Help arrived sooner than Elias could have hoped. The flashing lights of rescue vehicles pierced the darkness, and the sounds of hurried footsteps and concerned voices filled the air. Miraculously, despite the severity of the crash, Elias and the passengers survived. Bruised and shaken, they were pulled from the wreckage, the mangled remains of the bus a stark testament to the violence of the impact. As Elias lay on a stretcher, being attended to by paramedics, he looked back at the twisted metal of the bus, a profound sense of awe washing over him. He knew, with unwavering certainty, that he should not have survived. The damage to the vehicle was catastrophic, the odds of escaping unscathed were virtually non-existent. In that moment, Elias understood. It was Kai. The lost soul he had helped to find peace had returned the favor, a miraculous act of gratitude that transcended the boundaries of life and death. The Lon Ran Jua Su Song Vat Sai Chet had been crossed, and Elias had been pulled back, a recipient of a debt repaid from beyond the grave. The experience left him deeply shaken, but also filled with a profound sense of wonder and a renewed understanding of the invisible threads that connect us all, living and departed. What other mysteries lay hidden within the shadowed folds of the Daotam, And what further lessons would Elias learn from his continued journeys through the realm where the veil between worlds seemed so thin? The miraculous escape from the mangled wreckage left Elias with more than just physical scars. It etched a profound understanding into his soul. The Deo Tam, once a place of fear and foreboding, now carried a different weight, a testament to the unseen connections that bind the living and the departed. The image of Kai's gentle smile, a beacon in the moment of terror, became a constant reminder of the power of compassion, a silent whisper echoing through the lonely stretches of his night journeys. He continued his Saigon to Lat route, the familiar curves of the serpent's spine no longer feeling quite so menacing. Each pass through Curve 7 was now a moment of quiet reflection, a silent acknowledgement of the young man whose spirit had found peace, and in doing so, had extended a hand of salvation. The rain-swept nights and the dense balm toy of the mountain still held their mysteries, but Elias no longer felt alone in their embrace. He carried within him the unwavering belief in a world beyond the tangible, a realm where kindness could transcend the boundaries of life and death, where a simple act of empathy could ripple through the spiritual fabric of existence. The whispers of the wind through the pines seemed to carry more than just the chill of the mountain air. They hinted at the countless stories still unfolding along those winding roads, tales of loss and longing, of unexpected encounters and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The Tin Michigan of the night was no longer empty but filled with the potential for the extraordinary, the subtle dance between the seen and the unseen. Elias's life as a night bus driver continued, but his perspective had been irrevocably altered. He had glimpsed the profound interconnectedness of all things, the subtle yet powerful influence of the spiritual realm on the physical. The memory of Kai served as a constant reminder that even in the darkest corners and along the most treacherous paths, humanity and compassion could shine through, leaving behind not just fleeting moments of kindness, but echoes of grace that could resonate through eternity. And so, Elias drove on, a guardian of the night, forever changed by the Lin Han Vat Vong he had helped, forever aware of the silent promises whispered on the wind, the eternal truth that Gio Nanai, Gadan Yen, Sao Compassion, reap peace. The Deo Tam held its secrets still, but now, for Elias, they were secrets tinged with the gentle light of hope and the enduring power of a grateful spirit.